Hello, dudes, dudettes, duders, and everyone in between, and welcome to How to Do Everything So You Don't Have to. I'm your host, Jesse Kester. Today's episode is another questions and answers episode. You've got cues, so we are going to take a massive plunge down the answer corridor. Let's get into it so that you can get back to making fantastic movies. How do y'all store your video footage? I'm new to this and I'm mainly making YouTube videos of my personal projects. I end up with hours of footage that I edit down. I have an external SSD, but it's starting to get full. What do y'all do with your footage after you're done editing it? What's the most economical way to store it? I'm using Resolve. If I have to move the footage to another drive, I'd like to do it in a way that doesn't break the database. You kind of pulled a bait and switch there. I thought this was going to be an easy question about telling you to archive redundantly, and then we'd be done, but you brought Resolve into the mix, so that complicates everything. Let's break this down into two questions. How do you archive data, and how do you archive data from a Resolve project? So first, let's just talk about pipeline and hard drives, how we handle it. We shoot everything on SSDs. That's because we're using Blackmagics, and SSDs are the most bang for your buck, the most pounds per square inch, or whatever the expression is. It's the most data at the best cost. We move all that data from the SSDs to plate drives, and the reason we go to plate drives for post-production is because we simply don't have the capital to be editing off of 15 terabytes of SSDs right now. Besides, we're shooting entirely Blackmagic RAW and it's 4K and 6K, so plate drives are fast enough for real-time playback. Once we get into color correction and things like that, we start to notice some hiccups, but until then, we can do all of our editing in real time on plate drives, and they're much more cost-effective when you're in the 15 terabyte range than SSDs are. For archiving, we move to internal 8 terabyte drives. You get a drive caddy and you can drop 2 of these in at the same time and back up your projects to 2 disk drives at a time. This is 2022 Thiou 2A, so this is the A drive. It's the second 8 terabyte drive for Thiou, our company, in 2022. This is the B drive, and these 2 drives are identical. So if one of them fails, we still have access to all of the client data on the other drive. And I know, I am handling these drives very recklessly right now. You can leave a comment below about how about my devil-may-care attitude regarding data. But that's why we keep it redundant, because I do have an innate devil-may-care attitude about the sanctity of hard drives. We haven't had a major hard drive fail yet, but always keep it redundant when you archive your projects. If you don't have 2, you don't have 1. You always have 1 less than what you think you have. The big question in this email is about Resolve, and to answer that, we're going to go into the software itself. All right, we are in the project manager for DaVinci Resolve, and we've got 1 project in there, and we want to archive this. Simple as can be, you go to the project manager, right-click on the project you want to archive, and go down to Export Project Archive. Choose a location. We've got a folder called Archive on our desktop, and we're going to save it there. And you'll see that it gives you some options to save the media files, the render cache, and the proxy media. We don't generate proxy media because, like I said, for 4K and 6K Blackmagic RAW, playback is fine. We don't need proxies for that. And we don't usually have a render cache, so I turn this off because, like I said, 4K and 6K footage plays back fine without the render cache. But you do want to check media files, and you want to be careful because there's something special about this, very particular. When you archive media files, it only archives files that are used in your Resolve project. So what I mean by that is if you shoot 20 shots and you only put 10 of them into the Resolve project, it won't archive 20 shots. It'll only archive the 10 that you put into your Resolve project. So you need to be sure if there's anything you want to be archived in addition to the media files you used in your project, you have to archive those by hand. For example, when we do these projects, we have an outputs folder, and that'll be full of ProRes outputs, H.264, all kinds of different things. And none of those will be archived with the project archive, so we have to drag and drop the outputs folder in separately. Another thing to be mindful of is music. When you get music from Shutterstock or Premium Beats. It comes with loops and stems and different lengths for each song. If you only use the 60-second version of disco in your project, it will not archive 30, 15 full loops and stems. So you've got to drag that in separately. That's the one big headache of archiving with DaVinci Resolve. And if you're coming from Premiere, everything about archiving with DaVinci Resolve is a headache. Thank you so much for asking. I hope this was helpful. Next question. Sharegrid versus Kitsplit versus ? For gear owners. I've got some video and photo gear I haven't been using much lately. Anyone have experience renting their gear on any of these places? I probably wouldn't rent cameras, but I've got a Zoom H6, Tentacle sync gear, mics, lighting, etc. We list our gear on Sharegrid, and there are two things you need to know before jumping in. Number one, it is not a get-rich-quick scheme by any stretch of the imagination. We have not made back the cost of a single piece of gear in the last 2 years of renting. To add to that, lower-cost gear like a Zoom H6, I don't know what lights you're using, but if they're LED panels, most lower-level production houses and boutique shops like ourselves keep that gear in-house because it's so affordable. They're not that often looking for a Zoom H6 or LED panels. That said, if you want to help out the film community, if you want to be networking with other filmmakers, Sharegrid is a wonderful way to do that because you're going to be meeting people at kind of entry level looking for gear that they aren't getting from a rental house, which brings us to point number 2. And you really need to understand what voluntary parting is before you jump in with any rental site. Voluntary parting is a loophole in the law that if you willfully, voluntarily part with your gear, the other person is legally incapable of stealing it, even if they never return it. So they say they want to rent a camera for the weekend, you hand them the camera, they never get it back, you call up the police and you explain this to them, they will tell you that they can't do anything about it. So that means you need voluntary parting insurance. Sharegrid does provide this, and that's why I started renting with them. I don't know if Kitsplit does. I would like to think that they have introduced it. For a long time, neither Sharegrid nor Kitsplit offered voluntary parting insurance, and then Sharegrid was the first one to do it, so I went with them instead of Kitsplit. But you have to be aware of what voluntary parting is and what voluntary parting insurance is, and what the policy is of the site through which you are renting. Moving on. Anyone ever shot a film inside a prison or cell? Weird question. I'm currently planning a shoot for my short in which the opening scene takes place in a jail cell and maybe an office. Anyone have an experience with that or any advice on how to go about that? Anything helps. We've actually shot in 3 prisons over the course of 2 movies, so we're going to break it down movie by movie. The first film I'm going to talk about is the Jailbreak promo that I was director of photography on for when Jon Moxley left the WWE, and we shot in 2 different locations for a prison on that film. The first one we went to was a standing set in Los Angeles. Now, I don't know where you're based, but if you're in a major metropolitan area, you can Google standing sets, my area, jail cell, and if it's a big city, you'll probably find something. New York City would definitely have them. Atlanta would definitely have them. Austin would probably have a couple of jail standing sets. And Los Angeles definitely has several. So that would be the best option because the set is there waiting for you when you arrive. It is in an environment that was built for film production, and that means that there will probably be lots of power leads along the wall. They will probably have stingers if you need extra. Those are rented for $5 a day or whatever. And they will probably have high ceilings, and if it's a real bougie standing set, they'll have scaffolding on the ceiling so you can hang some lights if you need to. Option 2 is to build a set, and this was for Jailbreak. Ben, the producer of Wrestling Pro Wrestling, another wrestling show that I shoot, offered up his garage, and we built a jail cell in there. So the premise of the Jon Moxley Jailbreak is that Jon is in prison, and he uses nothing but his will and the force of his shoulder and muscles to destroy the concrete wall that is holding him in. And we couldn't destroy the concrete wall of the standing set because then it would no longer be a standing set, it would be a falling set. So we had to build a concrete wall, and we shot that in a garage. And you could actually build a very effective set in a garage if you're good at moody lighting and you can black out that garage. So the beautiful thing about film is that whatever the audience can't see, they don't know about. So with 4 pieces of plywood that you spray paint to look like concrete and maybe 10 PVC pipes that you spray paint black, if you light it dark, if you light it moody, you could probably communicate an effective prison for about $100 in parts at Home Depot. That's how we built our prison at Ben's garage, and when you watch the film, you really can't tell when we are in the standing set and when we are in the garage set, because that's the beauty of a dark film, is that you can't really tell the difference between one location and another. So be clever and be cheap, and you might be able to get away with that. Option number 3 is what we did for the promo we shot with Nick Gage, and that we shot in Philadelphia. Now, just quick shout out, all of these were directed by Matt Burns, aka Sick Nick Mondo. So check out his work. He's the mad genius behind these films. I was just the director of photography on those projects. So the Nick Gage shoot, we rented a prison in Philadelphia. It was the oldest standing abandoned prison on the East Coast or in America or something like that. I forget what their credentials were, but you could just book it out for 3 hours. It was very expensive, and it was worth every penny, because what you're paying for when you do that is for nobody else to be in the building. So for 3 hours or 2 hours, whatever it was, we had our run of the location. It was awesome to shoot. We got to see Al Capone's cell. We weren't allowed to shoot in there though, but we got to kind of run roughshod over the whole location. Now this is a fantastic solution if you can afford it. Renting out a prison for your film is very expensive. We could only afford 2 or 3 hours, but boy, was that a fun 2 or 3 hours. The place was old and huge and dingy and haunted, and it felt like you were getting tetanus just walking through it. And all of that ended up on the screen. And that's one of the beauties of renting a decommissioned prison. Of course, there are commissioned prisons still in operation, and that would be another option. I haven't personally done that because standing sets replicate the feeling of being in a real prison so well that to me, it makes more sense to go to a standing set. They're cheaper and they are more ready for a film crew than an actual prison. I hope this helps. Good luck with the shoot. And if you want to, when it's finished, leave a link to it in the comments below. I would love to see what you're working on. Thank you so much. Next question. I am a beginner. Should I get a Stedicam or gimbal? I am so confused. Gimbal! You want a gimbal, and I'll tell you why. The gimbal might look like the more complicated piece of equipment because it's got all those motors and batteries and software and apps and everything, but it's actually so much simpler for a beginner than the Stedicam. And the reason for that is that everything in a Stedicam depends on you, the operator. You have to know your camera intimately so you can balance it at the top correctly. And then you need to counterbalance it with some batteries. And then you need to feed that cable up through the shaft so that you can get it to the camera. Once you've got that balanced, you need to get that balance back onto your torso, and you do that through a series of connected arms that are spring-loaded. Now you need to balance those arms, and you should be using a dual arm system so that you can reduce bounce even more. But once you get it through that dual arm system, you need to balance those as well. When it gets to your chest finally, you need to make sure that that vest is fitting you perfectly, because the intent is that you're able to shoot for an hour, all day, not all in one long take, but you need to be able to wear that Steadicam for a long time if you're going to be a proper Steadicam operator. The gimbal, you put your camera on, you balance it in relation to itself, not in relation to all these other components, and then you turn on the gimbal, and the gimbal does the rest for you. If you want to get into Steadicam operation, and Steadicam operation is super duper fun. I was shooting some of that in Japan and I had a blast with all of it. If you want to get into it, I would highly recommend finding a mentor, somebody who is already operating a Steadicam, and working with them to have them explain the process to you in greater detail, because it is a very complicated process. It's a very detailed process, and it's also a very organic process. If you swap out a lens, you have to know how that's going to affect all of those factors back to your vest. And you need to be ready to accommodate that in a heartbeat if you're on set as a Steadicam operator. Much easier to just get a gimbal, balance it, and when you swap out the lenses, you have to readjust the balance, but you're still gonna have a much, much easier time. Gimbal, gimbal, gimbal. Next question. Hey everyone, one of my clients comes unprepared and wastes a lot of time during the recording process, even when we have a teleprompter. Should I give him per video time limit? For example, 30 minutes for a 3-minute playback video, including all retakes? Yes! Yes, you should do this. You should tell your client that they have 30 minutes to produce magic and whatever they make is what's going to air, because then they'll fire you and maybe they'll hire us instead. This is a suicidal idea. Your job is to bring out the best in the client. And if that takes 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 days, it is your job to make it happen. The thing that gets a little difficult is price, because some clients might not want to pay for 10 days of service. And at that point, you can walk. You can walk. There's no reason to do the job if they're not willing to pay for it, and if they're not willing to make it good. One thing I would say is that it's not a terrible idea to put a time limit on it, because people burn out. We tend to put our limit around 1 hour. If we're working with a talent that isn't really practiced in front of the camera, everything after an hour is just kind of flop sweat mitigated. So if we're not getting it in the first hour, we cut cameras, take a break, go get a nice coffee or something like that, come back and see if they can try again. And if it's just not working that day, maybe we need to rework the script or rework the questions. And I'm talking about when we use a teleprompter, and try again a day later or 2 days later, or maybe after a shot of whiskey, depending. Your job is really to bring the best out of them and to make them feel comfortable and confident and like they are delivering quality material to the camera. If you take that away from them, it's really, really quick that you will find yourself without clients. So I would recommend whatever avenues you can think of other than just putting a time limit and delivering whatever's the best from that. And this is a common problem. So even if it doesn't work out with this client, I promise you'll have more chances to practice at your answer and response in the future. Next question. Hey, I've been having a debate with my colleague about the 180-degree rule. He said shooting at 50 frames per second with a 1/50 shutter is okay because in the end it's going to be 25 frames per second. I say it should be at 1/100 if we're recording 50 frames per second, even if it will play back at 25 frames per second. Who's right? You're both right, and you're both wrong, and it depends on one key factor, and that is if you're playing the footage back in slow motion or at regular speed. So if you're playing the footage back in slow motion, that is 25 frames per second, but you're using all the frames you shot so that everything is playing at half speed, then you need to be at 1/100. If you are going to be doubling the speed of this footage and taking it from slow motion to regular speed, essentially deleting every other frame of the film, then 1/50 is the correct answer. Why is this? First of all, if you're shooting 50 frames per second at 1/50 on the shutter, you are at a 360-degree angle. Whether you play this back at 1 frame per second or 100 frames per second, you are playing it back at a 360-degree angle. If you are deleting every other frame on this video, then you are deleting half of the motion blur, which would take you back to a theoretical 180 degrees. But that would be debatable, and if you're going to be playing it back at real time instead of slow motion, the question comes up, why wouldn't you just shoot 25 frames per second? So you're both right and you're both wrong, and I would leave it, if I'm shooting at 50 frames per second, I would leave it at 1/100, whether I'm playing back in slow motion or regular speed, because if you're at 1/100, you can play it back in slow motion and still have a 180-degree shutter angle. And if you're playing it back at regular speed, you've got a 90-degree shutter angle. And I always like a tighter shutter. I don't like more motion blur. Once you exceed that 180, it gets really blurry and I don't like the look of it at all. So final verdict, you're right. Next question. How to light small scale subjects at night. I'm trying to make videos of a 1/10 scale RC rock crawler at night. The truck itself throws off a lot of light, headlights, taillights, rock lights, light bar. However, I struggle with how to light such a small scene in a believable way while remaining highly mobile. I'm trying to film outdoors at places like beaches or rocky trails at night. Once the truck moves 15 feet up the trail, I need to reposition everything. Advice? Thanks. How do you make pink lemonade? Pink lemons. How do you light a small set? Small lights. If I were doing this, I would start with an LED panel and I would tint it very blue to simulate moonlight, and I'd keep it about maybe 5-10 feet above the object that you're filming, and you're just gonna have to relight as it continues down the trail. The way light rolls off, you can't travel that far from a miniature object traveling 15 feet. You're just gonna have too much roll off from when it's under the light to when it's down the trail, so you're gonna have to do this in segments. If you want to build like a trail of LEDs, you could get 10 of them and have them spaced out about 10 feet apart and just light the whole trail, but you're gonna need to kind of stagger them. That's what I would start with, and I would start with as soft lighting as possible, because what you're doing is essentially simulating the moon with it. So you just want a soft, even light over everything. You don't want some kind of spotlight casting deep shadows. Another thing I would consider trying is day for night. This might be a perfect candidate for day for night. You're gonna lose the efficacy of the headlights on the RC rock crawler, but you might get some really cool looking footage. For a good example of day for night, I would go to Mad Max Fury Road. In fact, for a good example of pretty much everything under the sun, I would go to Mad Max Fury Road. Next question. When a 24mm 1.33 times anamorphic is not wide enough, amateur seeking advice from the pros. Working with cell phone cameras has corrupted my perspective on the angle of view a wide-angle lens can cover. How do you deal with a situation when you are in tight locations and the 24mm does not give you the angle of view you need? I can move the camera back, but there is only so much space before I hit the room wall. I am using a Sirui 24mm f2.8 1.33 anamorphic lens. Do your anamorphic lenses perhaps look like these? Yes, I love the Sirui Anamorphics, and we have 2 of them. Can't wait to get the other 2. I just need a few more coins in my back pocket before I can do that. I've got 3 suggestions for you. Number 1, smash the wall, move the camera back. Terrible suggestion. Don't do it. Number 2, cheat the establishing shots. I imagine that the reason you want a wider shot is because you're trying to establish the geography of the room, where people are in relation to each other, and perhaps include a few objects that they're going to interact with during the scene, so the audience understands the setting of the environment. If it's just for the establishing shot, what you can do is get a wide-angle lens, put it on your camera, shoot that shot, and then crop it in post. I would not recommend doing this for a whole scene, but we do this all the time with Mavic footage. We have done this for establishing shots in anamorphic dialogue scenes where we just couldn't get wide enough with the 35 and 50 Sureis. It works. Don't dwell on it too long. Establish the geography, establish the room, and then move on from that shot as quick as you can. But if you need that wide shot and you can't get it with the anamorphics, you can cheat it. We've done it before. We will do it again. Give it a try. See if it works for you. Number 3, break that establishing shot down into smaller shots. So if you've got 2 people talking to each other at a table and one of them is holding, the proposal letter that he wants to give the other person at the table, you want to show all this in one shot, maybe you can show it in 3 or 4 shots. Show the one person at one side, the other person at the other side. Show them, thumbing the envelope, turning it over in their hands, perhaps underneath the table. So it's, we understand how nervous they are about this. You can get the insert of them scratching the back of their head while the bead of sweat rolls down, stuff like that. Try breaking that establishing shot up into smaller shots. You won't get the geography of the room, but if you're doing a dialogue scene, you don't really need the geography of the room. If it's an action set piece where somebody's at a workbench and then someone else is going to throw them on the workbench, you really do want to see all the tools in the background that could be used to bash his face in, or whatever you're going to do in that action set piece. But if it's just a dialogue scene, maybe you can skimp on the geography for that shot. I hope that was helpful. I will be back again with another question and answer episode soon. Until then, if you want to learn more about what we do, go to thiuphoto.com. We do have a Patreon. You are under no obligation to subscribe to that one, but if you want to, you can. It would help us out greatly. What else is there? If you want the Light Leaks pack that we have, it's for free on our website. Go download it 500 times and resell it if you like. I don't even care. That's what a renegade I am. Until the next time, thank you so much for watching. Now, please, for the love of God, stop watching YouTube and get back to making fantastic movies. Bye!